So we have explored companion species in 2 sessions now, and we have noted the fact that in practically all life forms, you can discern a dependence on other life forms. You can see that we become with other life forms, and as we saw in the last session, our bodies, because they are injurable, because they are vulnerable, share vulnerabilities with other life forms. We also spoke of the fact that bodies which exist, which live way outside our so-called industrialized world, also suffer from the same kind of, or perhaps different kinds of toxic contamination that you cannot imagine. Then how did people like the Inuits or the Greenlanders suffer from, or why do they have so many toxins? The answer is, as we have seen in our references to Marla Korn's work, Silent Snow, and in the case of others, that the toxins move from the industries in the United States and Europe into the water. The animals in the water consume that water, and the people who eat those animals for survival get those toxins. We also noted the fact that environmental injustice and social injustice cannot be separated, because in places where there has been a history of, for example, slavery, that kind of racialized and uneven distribution of, say, benefits or harm are persistent even now. So in our reference to Flowers' book, Waste, Sandra Stengreber's Living Downstream, we noted the fact that in certain parts of the world and in certain parts of the United States, toxic dumping is done in areas which have a high volume of, say, colored people and larger populations of colored people. Those are also places which have histories of slavery. Toxic dumping which happens in the global south, exploitation of resources which take place from the global south, are race-based environmental injustice situations. And here, environmental injustice is inseparable from social injustice. Right? Having said that, we now move on to looking at literary texts in which multi-species belonging has been documented. In the last, say, 20 years or so, there have been numerous authors who have looked at questions of multi-species belonging, multi-species dependency, and of course, like we said in the last lesson, multi-species vulnerability. We'll try and cover some of these points in today's talk, right? And we will first look at a small excerpt from Margaret Atwood's The Year of the Flood. Margaret Atwood's The Mad Adam trilogy is now a near classic or cult text, which because it addresses all the points that environmentalists have been talking about. This is the excerpt. You can read it on your screen as well. Consider also his work in the earth. Without the earthworms and nematodes and ants and the endless tilling of the soil, without which it would harden into a cement-like mass, extinguishing all life. Think of the antibiotic properties of the maggots and the various molds and the honey that our bees make, and also the spider's web, so useful in the stopping of blood flow from a wound. For every ill, God has provided a remedy in his great medicine chest of nature. Through the work of the carrion beetles and the putrefying bacteria, our fleshly habitations are broken down and returned to their elements to enrich the lives of other creatures. At first glance, this seems too biological and technical, which in one sense is true. But if you think carefully, Atwood is documenting the role that earthworms, worms, maggots, spiders, bees, how these species, different species, make the soil, make the air, make the human body. as she notes in the last section of that particular passage, which is up there for you, it is through the action of putrefying bacteria that dead bodies are reduced to materials, and those materials then provide the source of further life. And if you recall, in one of the sessions on companion species, I mentioned via Richard Powers' our story that trees that fall provide the sustenance for other life forms as well. So you cannot think of any body as standalone. And Atwood's passage, which you have just seen here, talks about the fact that the fertility of the soil, its value, depends on worms. The spider web, the bee, all of these contribute. And what happens, or let's speculate, what would happen if the dead bodies of creatures do not dissolve? What would happen if dead bodies remain that way? The putrefaction, the decomposition of dead bodies is central to a balance of life on Earth. If our planet were covered with the dead bodies of creatures who are no longer with us, there wouldn't be space for the living, right? Which means that dead bodies are broken down. How are the dead bodies broken down? Putrefaction, as it's called, is a messy process. I mean, we don't like talking about it, although several horror films are made about it. We don't want to address this. The bodies that putrefy are reduced to their elements. They go back, the elements go back into the earth. And that's where the sustenance for future life emerges. So death actually provides the source of life. Death becomes a means of generation of life. Okay, so the dependency of all creatures on each other is Margaret Atwood. Parallel to that is the excerpt from Richard Powers, the Over story. People aren't the apex species they think they are. Other creatures, bigger, smaller, faster, older, younger, more powerful, call the shots, make the air, and eat sunlight. Without them, nothing. It's a well-established fact that but for the plants, there will be no life, right? We all know what plants do. We know that plants are dependent on processes such as photosynthesis, which requires the presence of light. Their germination and spread requires the presence of wind or water, which transmits their seeds across generations, spaces, etc. They depend on sustenance, nourishment from the soil. And humans think we are apex species. Humans believe that we are the crown of creation, right? As it's traditionally called, we're the crown of creation. Whereas Richard Powers' excerpt shows, we definitely are not. There are smaller creatures than us, there are bigger creatures than us. All of those take primary spot. They may not take primary spot in the sense they don't send a spacecraft to the moon, or they have not invented the atom bomb, and of course they have not done architectural marvels like the pyramids or the Taj Mahal. Fair enough. Fair enough. But that does not mean that they are lower down the hierarchy. You see, it's humans who decide who comes first, who comes at the top of the hierarchy. But as Powers' passage shows, that's a very odd suggestion. It's a very odd myth, because we depend on these other species. We have lived because of them. We have evolved because of them. There are several ones. So when we say apex species, how exactly are we apex? Because we have computers and buildings. Because we have spacecraft. On what grounds do we see ourselves as apex species? Okay, let's make it more complicated. When we say apex species, does it mean we are more moral and ethical? I mean, if you are apex, then you should be apex at several levels, right? You should be more intelligent, more hardworking, more compassionate, more empathetic than others. Are we that? Are humans more compassionate, more understanding, more empathetic in comparison with others, with other life forms? Remember, the battle between humans and animals, as constructed within these stories and myths and criticism and theory, is that humans kill for pleasure. We are the only life form that actually does this. So, does that mean we are morally also apex? Clearly not, isn't it? Clearly, we are not the apex creatures in moral and ethical terms. So there are other creatures, and the other creatures keep us going. They make it possible for us to live. Alexis Smith, in her, the novel Moore Island, notes the fact that mushrooms grow everywhere for miles. Moore Island is post-Fukushima, and it talks about how post-Fukushima, the land is so polluted that it has to be revived, it has to be regenerated. And what helps that regeneration is the mushroom. The mushroom, when grown in sufficiently large quantities, make sure that, and that's the quote that you see on screen, they go for miles under the soil, taking up what's there, they break it down. They break it down. Vegetation, animals, minerals. And that leaves the soil in which plants can flourish. So think about this. Fukushima, man-made tragedy, natural disaster, we will not debate that. We will not go into that particular part of it. Although there's an argument that all natural tragedies, all natural disasters also have a human component, because the natural force has been unleashed because of what humans have done. That in many ways, natural disasters also have human causal factors somewhere. That's a different point. I do not want to dwell upon that, but keep that in mind. But Alexis Smith shows that the island's revival, the island's regeneration is only possible when the mushrooms are allowed to do their work. So you plant the mushrooms, they go all over the place, they break down the material, and in that sense rejuvenate the soil. A similar example can be found in Amitav Ghosh, The Hungry Tide, where he speaks about the crabs that emerge at dawn. And what do? They salvage the rich haul of leaves and other debris left behind. And life forms that keep the mangroves alive by removing the leaves and litter. That's how they enable further life. Ghosh is speaking about them as more or less like scavengers, right? They're natural scavengers. They remove the detritus, dead leaves, what we think of as the waste output of various physiological processes. And they break them into small bits. The soil is cleaned up, the water is cleaned up, and you can build something with that there. So, in effect, they ensure that the purity of the soil is kept. That's multi-species dependency. That's multi-species responsibility. All right? Very important to note. So, what we are looking at here is we have to see the landscape as spaces of cohabitation of multiple species. And we have to see collectives such as the forest as one organism, because it unites everything into itself. The plant, the leaves, and various parts of the plant, but also the bacterial, microbial, fungal connections. Then there are the connections with the bees and the birds. It's one organism. When Richard Powers' character Patricia Rutherford argues that other species than humans have called the shots by producing the air and the food on which all species depend, she has said that the individual is the forest and vice versa. Amitabh Ghosh, Alexis Smith, whom I've cited before, and others, point to the fact that species help each other survive. They support each other. They enable sustenance. They ward off predators. They provide mutual support. So you have to see the landscape as a space of interconnected species, of cohabitation of very different kinds of species. That's multi-species. So these are novels, and you can see the examples that I've put up there, and which you can read. Perhaps you would not want to dip into the novels themselves. Powers is a very powerful text, of course. Sorry about the unintended pun. The forest breathes fresh air. It provides the necessary air for other species. But the forest depends on other things. Worms in the soil, birds to pollinate, bees, all sorts of things. So, are we the apex species? Highly doubtful, isn't it? It's not at all clear that we are an apex species. In our last session, we spoke about shared vulnerability, right? That humans share vulnerability with other life forms because all life forms have a body, and a body is injurable, is vulnerable, right? So we've noted that. Let's look at a couple of examples where this has been documented. And this is from Maya Montero's In the Palm of Darkness, which is set in Haiti. And if you look at the passage for a minute, you will see the fish have disappeared, the wild pigs have disappeared, the migratory ducks have disappeared. Even the iguanas are gone. And she says, just take a look at what's left for humans. Just take a careful look. You can see the bones pushing out under our skins if they want to escape. To leave behind that weak flesh where they're so battered, to go into hiding someplace else. When I say frogs, I mean any creature, and you'll find only a great hill of bones on the shore. And she says, the bones are all that remain. Everything else was gone. But what is interesting in Montero's account is that she links species loss with human species loss. And if you look at the second passage up on your screen, speaks about the corpses at dawn, the man whose hands were missing, the man whose face was missing. And here too she says, Haiti was disappearing, the great hill of bones growing before our very eyes. If you look at the passage on this side, this Haiti is finished, God Almighty, those bones are all that remain. Here, again, bones are all that remain. So, is it just a question of frogs dying? Clearly not, isn't it? It's more than one species dying. Shared vulnerability, right? Another famous text which talks about this is Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior. And she talks about the fact that the monarch butterflies have changed their seasonal routine because of the change in weather conditions based on changes of all sorts of things, which is explained to you, described for you in the second smaller passage excerpt which has been put up on your screen, that the air heats up and the overwintering habitat for trees die due to high temperatures, and the migration and flowering patterns of the milkweed plants have changed. So everything has changed, which is the reason why, interestingly, Margaret Atwood would say, why do you call it climate changed? We should call it everything changed. Which is true. It's not just climate. Everything has changed. So if you look at multi-species, you see how in the previous excerpt from Maya Montero, she speaks about the pigs have disappeared, the birds have disappeared, this species has disappeared, all of them have disappeared, and humans have also disappeared. Remember what I said, the environmental injustice theme cannot be delinked from from the social injustice theme. In a place where the humans have been massacred, the plants and animal species are also disappearing. So here you see migration and flowering patterns of the milkweed plants have changed. So climate change has altered the flight behavior of both humans and the non-humans. And that's something suggested by a lot of contemporary literature. So the question is, are we speaking about the extinction of one species, two species, maybe 300 species? For most of the people writing within environmental literature, extinction has to be called co-extinction. Look at the excerpt from Charlotte McConaghy's Migrations. The animals are dying, soon we will be alone here, says McConaghy. And Barbara Kingsolver, who says, it's like the butterflies came here and we might be next, like they are a sign of something. Julia Lay's The Hunter, which is also a fairly successful Willem Dafoe film. The man shoots the last thylacine, and the thylacine dying notes the fact that you've killed me. And the description goes, he holds the animal in his sights, knowing that he is a killer and that he too will be killed. Multi-species solidarity involves seeing not just the death of one species. You have to expand it to look at the non-human as indexing what will happen to us. That once the animals go, what will happen to us? As McConaghy says, the animals are dying, soon we'll be all alone here. If one species disappears, what stops other species from disappearing? What will happen to the humans as well? And people who have written on this, on extinction themes, like Tom Von Duren and Deborah Bird Rose and others, have noted that once species start disappearing, they are sentinels. At some point, you will understand that this disappearance will become a part of the human process as well, that humans will disappear too. So in novels like The Overstory or Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior or Charlotte McConaghy's Migrations, species such as Douglas firs, the monarch butterflies draw people from all over the world. There are protests and there are people saying you cannot allow trees to be cut down. And you know about our own Chipko movement, which had people protesting against the removal of trees. Even now you see those. That means to say that these are examples of multi-species alliances. These are interspecies and multiracial. That we recognize, we understand that what we are doing to the planet means that we are not just putting some species at risk. That at some point, species death will come to the humans as well. Now, I accept that this has a certain utilitarian sense, that it is because we want to survive that the world should be preserved. Be that as it may, I do not wish to discuss the politics of environmentalism here. That's the subject for a different kind of course altogether. But in posthumanism, it's important to note this kind of trans-species solidarity, trans-species connections, because we recognize that the death of one species is a harbinger, is a preliminary to something else. That at some point, these kinds of species deaths will lead to the death of the humans as well. Thank you.